Thank you very much, Ida, and apologies. This is so paradoxical, but this is when. Oops. Hold on. I will. It is precisely during the session on digitalization that all technological means were cut off from my side and actually from another colleague's side. So I guess that's why the recording has stopped and the recording is starting again. So I'm guessing it might be an OECD issue. So, but. Thank you. I've taken great notes on all the points, and except I missed just a couple of points. But thank you so much. And I'll maybe just give the floor directly to Director Metsandi, and then we can come back to some questions also from the audience. And I'll see that we have colleagues already prepared for some questions.
Hello, everyone. Hi, Sydney, dear colleagues. Thank you for inviting me today to this extremely interesting discussion. And thank you, Ida, also for your very informative reporting. And I noted a couple of points, and maybe then when I talk, I also kind of reflect on what you said. Estonia started to, share our digital transformation experience already some years ago, and it was really like demand-driven. We didn't know to offer our experience. But we saw more and more other partners coming towards us and just wanted to hear our real experience, how Estonia has achieved within 30 plus years what some countries still are kind of trying to achieve. Therefore, also the digitalization is really one of the has been one of the priority sectors, and it is also horizontal priority. We believe truly that digitalization, or having a digital component in every project, it actually also kind of has a positive impact on the whole efficiency aspect. And I know that the efficiency criteria is also important for OECD DAC. I bring one example. We were training the Afghan midwives. I mean, not we, but one of our NGOs. And the midwives of Afghanistan were traveling, to Estonia to attend 1 month long classes here. And it was at the beginning challenging for those midwives because they had to leave their families behind and children for a month, adjusting to also new cultural context. And there was also very high cost of that program. All these travel costs. And after the first group of trainees, the project partners actually decided, and it's already some years ago actually, decided to move the lectures to Moodle platform, and the discussion groups and seminars to Skype, and to implement the program remotely. And what we saw, it not only did decrease the costs, it also allowed for a bigger group of participants to take part of the program from the Afghan side. And by the end of the program, there was a set of recorded lectures that could be used also later. So it increased also the sustainability of such program. And in addition, during COVID times, the relevance of digitalization also improved significantly in the eyes of both, beneficiaries and target countries overall. For example, last year when the pandemic started, we launched a call for proposals, and there was a very kind of strict rule that each proposal had to come in with an innovative digital component. And the sectors were, mainly health and education, because we saw that there was a huge need for, health services, access to health services was decreased. And also, since the schools were closed, we had to quickly see how we can, improve the situation of the children, and have a project where the digital component, innovative solution, which can come also from private sector, is nice to combine with the, let's say, other part of the project, which is driven by an NGO. And this kind of mix and match proved to be very also efficient in terms that, NGOs have a longer kind of experience in development cooperation and in many partner countries, while maybe the providers of some innovative solution, they don't have such an experience. So there was also peer learning between those two actors. And we, for example, currently are implementing a project in Kenya, where when we talk about education, we were combining also the digital skills component with solar panel component, so that where there is a lack of energy or access to electricity, we can still implement the project while combining the two elements. And this project, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, is currently being implemented in Kakuma refugee camp. So, and when we talk about the measuring part and evaluation part, in the project proposal, the applicants outline how digitalization is integrated to the design of the project. And each project application has to evaluate also how strongly the initiative helps to advance digitalization in partner country. Meaning that the activities are extensively using ICT solutions, or they create opportunity for wider adoption of ICT solutions, or if they like substantially, introduce also new ICT solutions in partner country. In the case the initiative plans to partially or substantially involve digitalization, the applicant also has to explain in more detail how it is done. When the activities are later evaluated and the report is compiled, specific ICT related indicators are used. For example, the number of ICT solutions that were adopted, or average number of users per month of the newly adopted ICT solution, the number of beneficiaries whose digital skills improved, or the number of beneficiaries whose access to internet, computers, or cell phones improved as a result of such initiative. So in this way, it is made sure that digitalization results are monitored, and it is an integral dimension of the monitoring and evaluation system. Now, if I may, a couple of comments also on what Ida highlighted. I think that today every donor wants to implement something digital. There are hundreds and hundreds of solutions being proposed to the partner countries. With that, I think we might do even more harm. So interoperability is really, really important part of, going through the whole digital transformation path. So us as donors, we need to really have this more of common platforms, and that's why I also like the D4D initiative of the European Union, and that's why Estonia was one of the founding members of such initiative, because we feel that we donors, we need to discuss among each other, and we need to have a clear division of labor, if I may say so, where we basically say and who is kind of strong in what, and who has in what concrete sector comparative advantage, and how, where there is, you know, several common interests, we work more closely together. We also combine our programs together. That's why I very much also like the Team Europe initiative, which actually, you know, brings us all as a European Union to work together. And I was also very delighted to see that in the last development cooperation or foreign minister development ministers meeting in Brussels, we had the first ever, I believe, substantive dialogue with US on how to work together. And part of digitalization is really, really important there, because it's also not only about having access to internet, but it's also about democratic and values we as, you know, donors can bring along when we also implement our programs. And Estonia is really trying to work with those donors with whom we share the same values and with whom we can, you know, also combine our projects. Therefore, for example, last year we signed a memorandum of or joint declaration of cooperation with USAID, where we as Estonia, as a digital nation, can bring our digital component into some of the projects which USAID is implementing. And we're, you know, looking for other partners. We also very much work on digitalization with Germany, GIZ, and like I also already mentioned, in D4D, we have close partners of the European Union. I think that as a whole, we're going in the right direction, but we need to be aware that we do not do any harm to our partners. So I'll stop here. Thank you. Over to you, Sydney.
Thank you very much, Director Metsandi. It was well, inspiring in a way, because I mean, coming from a small country, Belgium, that takes this question of digital quite with importance. You know, in a way, this kind of systematic and say cross-cutting dimension is still somehow lacking. So I think it's really fascinating, and I think what you just mentioned at the end, that in a way another form of mainstreaming is also to work with others in their interventions and bring that digital component. And I think that's quite interesting also. I don't want to go into questions myself, but I do have some without first going to Mix for his in reflections and intervention.
Yeah, thank you very much for this this session today. I actually have a very short presentation that I wanted to share. And essentially, in this presentation, I really wanted to focus primarily on sort of a development practitioner's perspective. Essentially, we really touched upon a lot of policy implications, and I wanted to go from the perspective of essentially being on the ground, being there with the project implementation, and what are some of the lessons learned. So I myself, I know that introduction has been largely related to me working on the Latvian context, but basically my background is primarily I've been working in sustainable development for 8 years, and largely with the World Bank interventions and operations around the world, in the Caribbean, Latin America, East and West Africa, and also Papua New Guinea, and across sectors, and largely related to M&E analytics and IT systems development. And essentially, I wanted to sort of, for today, sort of combine some of those lessons learned from actually going through the project implementation on the ground, and what are some of the elements. And I really want to thank both Aida and Kadi, because there are so many elements that when you were talking from the policy perspective, it's great to hear that policymakers and are really closely going into the direction of what's really happening on the ground. A lot of elements resonated, especially regarding silos and also sort of the aspects of interoperability. But here are just a few main lessons learned, and basically within and across the projects that I've been largely working on, we've been trying to streamline various kinds of digital technologies, starting from having early warning systems to monitor conflict, to having farmers' ID systems in place, to having essentially using digital technologies to monitor and sort of monitor project implementation. And one of those, or geospatial technologies, and one of the largest sort of takeaway points is that really one size does not always fit all. When reading through the Latvian development policy, it seems like we do prioritize largely digitalization as a large umbrella term, and we want to transfer over some of the technologies that have worked in our context. But what really, when implementing projects on the ground, we frequently see that there is a need for quite a lot of adaptation of the systems to actually have a streamlined effect on project implementation. And sometimes the idea of just focusing solely on digital technology transfer, which has been to a certain extent discussed in the policy, might not be sufficient without having additional investments in adapting it to the local institutional and also sort of environment on the ground. Another aspect that is a major lesson learned from these 8 years is essentially the fact that digitalization results in quite a large change in the institutional and political and economy environments on the ground. It rearranges institutional arrangements frequently. It creates situations where essentially different actors might start having different roles and responsibilities, and their involvement might be further monitored. So essentially, this institutional and political change that happens via digitalization needs to be very much accounted for when we're talking about development programming as a policy, because it does really request a very strong buy-in from various types of actors and very strong personal relationships to convince that the longer-term effect of these institutional changes that arise from digitalization will actually yield the benefits to the project and to the local situation. One of the other aspects trying to implement these kinds of different types of digital technologies in development programming is the fact that the solution is only half of the battle. And it sort of really goes along the lines of what previous speakers have been saying, because essentially you can have the best and most adaptive digital solution on the ground, but without really giving the sufficient attention towards capacity building and regulatory environments, procedures of how these technologies can be used, the transfer cannot properly happen. It essentially creates dependencies frequently and requires quite a considerable and sustained effort of the donor to constantly be involved if the local capacity and local sort of procedural and regulatory environment is not altered with the transfer of digital technologies or with the mainstreaming of digital technologies within development programs. So, and with some of the projects that I'm working on in East Asia and Pacific, really we had the solution already several years ago. But it took a long period of time until we got to a level where essentially there is a local capacity of taking up some of those solutions that were developed, and the training and procedural development and regulatory environment was actually quite a considerable challenge. And really also this was mentioned both by Ida and by Kadi, but the fact that another major lesson is digital silos are spread across multiple areas. They are very, very common, and essentially what often happens is that the actor responsible for the development intervention really focuses on the needs of the overall beneficiaries or the project objectives, and therefore introduces different kinds of digital technologies. But silos really are prolific, and oftentimes the recipient governments are very much opposed politically, sometimes even, to the introduction of such technologies, because they exist in a standalone manner. And I just really want to echo the previous two speakers that it is important. The interoperability of digital technologies is extremely important. I've seen this in various fields when it comes to data sharing and data analysis technologies that are being introduced, or where at the end of the day, everybody has access to different types of information. So it's very important to think, how do we integrate some of those technologies that we want to share, or that we want to work together with the partners into the broader system that already exists on the ground. And lastly, one major lesson is, and as I mentioned also before, it will take time to transfer, even though the solution is there, even though it's adaptive, even though there's a political will that is necessary to implement this, and even though it is integrated within the existing system, as was previously mentioned, the digital divide in terms of capacity differences is extremely large. And it does take time until the actual rollout can happen. So it really requires a sustained effort when it comes to actually financing and sort of supporting such projects. It cannot just be a one-time thing. It needs to definitely be a long-term effort. And obviously there will be failure, because oftentimes it needs a lot of modifications of any kind of digital technology that you try to streamline within development programs to be adaptive to the local situation on the ground. Yeah, there was a few figures that were already mentioned. I think this is already quite encouraging. We know we're at the cusp of a digital revolution, or we're in the middle of it, and the 2.5 billion people that are projected to have access to the ICT services will certainly rearrange the entire development architecture. And I think here, before I end, I think it's really important to look at our own startup potential. And this is for startup circumstances, old data. This is 2018, 2019, but I think the Latvian startup space is in the region everywhere, quite booming and quite new. And I think we have to really try to figure out how to use the potential that exists on the ground. And here are a few figures about the Latvian startup space just a few years ago. And I think this does not include the ICT sector as a whole. This is just startups that essentially are the hubs of innovation. And we can see quite a growing turnover, as well as the fact that 83% of them are new, essentially, just a few years back. So it's there's many new companies that come into place. And I think, like, when we talk about some additional avenues for Latvia, I think, and it's great to think about the overall guidelines for this. At the moment, going through the development policy, it seems that digitalization is an objective. It is something that Latvia wants to promote. However, it seems that having clear guidelines of what we really want to do is extremely important. It's great that such are being developed. I think it's vital that there is a stronger focus on mapping the achievers that already work in this space, and oftentimes these achievers are not visible or are operating with financing that is coming from elsewhere. They're operating by themselves. There's many really interesting initiatives that I've heard. For instance, the Institute of Environmental Solutions that is currently using machine learning and geospatial data in Vietnam to monitor the usage of climate adaptive farming systems for rice farmers, and using this data to essentially help with the certification process. Some of projects like this exist, and they might not really be in the purview. And I think mapping them out and seeing that the startup ecosystem itself is filled with different kinds of problem solvers that might be already operating in this arena is extremely important. Secondly, I think it's another element to focus on is really finding a niche. I think that defining an umbrella term, digitalization, and then trying to shoot in all directions might not be the best option. We've seen that also from the example of Estonia, from which we always learn and which has a great spillover effect on the region as a whole. I think there's quite a number of elements that we could focus on, such as fintech, big data, agritech, e-governance, or others. But it is vital that we find this niche and this specialization in this realm where we provide our own additional expertise on instead of focusing across the board. Of course, aligning a strategy, I agree with the previous statements that there are countries that have had a specific strategy when it comes to digital for development, or D4D, and so I think that having our own strategy here is vital, taking these previous considerations on board. Another element I think that is a problem largely for the startup environment as well, but I think in this case provides a lot of opportunities, is unlocking the potential of Latvian universities. As we know, a major portion of our student body consists of people from the target countries that Latvia is trying to implement development policy in, such as Central Asia, Ukraine, Moldova, Belarus now increasingly, and others. And there's a number of IT sectors, IT programs that are being implemented. So having, working closer with these universities and trying to expedite this sort of mission orientation within them could really harness very large effects when it comes to trying to find homegrown solutions that are actually adaptable to the local situations on the ground, as students might know their own countries considerably better than maybe some outsiders could. And then, of course, I really like the Estonian example of having these applications that really have to talk about, having this innovative digital component as part of the application. I think it's a very great initiative, and I think it's vital also for Latvia to learn from our northern neighbors, as usual. How to follow a similar approach, and I think it's also important that we see how these different kinds of niche initiatives that are organized in Latvia could be integrated within programs that are already being deployed. So seeing how do we build these linkages between the development actors that are receiving financing either via bilateral aid or in programs where Latvia participates, how do these local actors could be integrated within those programs, or their solutions could be integrated with those programs. And lastly, I think that there's a lot of potential when it comes to peer-to-peer or peer-to-peer development, not only learning but also development. I think that as far the current plan is to invest 200 million euros from the COVID recovery funding into digitalization and e-governance systems, essentially using this, and so there's going to be a wide range of different e-governance solutions that are going to be created in the next few years. Also, in terms of the private sector as well, I think using this opportunity and funding for peer development with both other donor countries and some of the recipients could really harness and create a win-win situation, where essentially the solutions that are developed are not only usable and applicable to the Latvian context, but to a broader context that could also translate into development aid program. So this is very quickly an overview from my end, and thanks very much.
Thanks so much. Really fascinating presentation. Also linking with the Latvian context. I think it was particularly useful to have this discussion. Maybe I can ask Linda to put the four of us on the screen and maybe follow up, because we do have a bit for 14 minutes for discussions, and I will maybe give the chance to colleagues participating to raise the questions. But in the meantime, what they do, I do have actually a common question on this point of interoperability that you've basically all pointed out or mentioned, and what would be interesting is maybe in the DCR has this issue come up, and in what ways, and how maybe some donors are tackling it or are addressing it. And maybe for Kadi, you you mentioned all the elements on ICT and digital that are part of the applications and are part of the monitoring. Is this question of interoperability also part of that? Are you asking your implementers or the projects that are being financed, how do they ensure interoperability with other ICT or modalities? So maybe I'll start by that, and maybe let's I don't know if Aida or Kadi wants to come in first.
Thank you, Sydney. Very good question. The quick answer is no, but we will. You know, we're reforming currently our whole development cooperation sector, and one part of the reform is also kind of improving our current monitoring and evaluation system, which means that we are currently going through all the different application forms. And actually the question of interoperability, which is just raised, that was also at our table. We still, I mean, if we talk about the e-governance implementation, then of course interoperability is integral part, because our X-Road is the interoperability backbone. And if we implement, or Estonia implements e-governance related projects, there is no question. But when we are talking about, let's say, different education related initiatives, then indeed we haven't so far put in the, let's say, evaluation form this interoperability as such. But again, like I said, now when we're reforming everything, we're also looking into that. I wanted to make another comment, but I forgot. So over to you.
Thank you. Aida, maybe I'll let you come in.
Thank you, Sydney. A few examples come to mind, and with the massive reports. So I haven't like got them all, so I won't do justice to everything. But I think some of the messages that have come up around interoperability I think there's a good degree of still naming the problem, and I think there's a lot of work then thinking through what would be the way to get past it. But there is a lot of discussion around digital public infrastructure and digital public goods. It's a Digital Public Goods Alliance, discussions around especially open source, and at the policy level and at the higher level, really for governments to define what it is and what are the limits, and that the international community falls into line, and that the supply-driven technology transfer approach is increasingly kind of dissuade. In the health sector, USAID, and it's interesting that Estonia is working with USAID. So I'm going to now do a little reference, if you don't mind, Kadi, and just mention, and Estonia is partnering with on the basis of this discussion, just to give a nod. In the health sector, this has become hugely problematic. And USAID is working with, it's got Digital Square. There are several initiatives, Digital Square. There is a lot of work with the WHO. There are principles for effectiveness around sharing and around system-wide approaches in the health sector. And we have a very good health sector case study from USAID that really gets talking about that. And there's also more initiatives around kind of what they're calling data collaboratives, and trying to really create platforms around data sharing and thinking through this. And then I think the last point, and it comes out from Colombia, that's made a lot of progress too, and it has worked with several international partners. You know, if you have this principle around inclusion and being user-centered, and I guess that's the Estonian experience too. And so what is the backbone of your system? And the user-centeredness, well, then the supply-driven will have to also adapt for that situation. So if you apply a user-centered principle to how you go about investing in digital solutions, that can also help maybe weed out some of the silos. But I'll stop there. There'll be more in the report, and you've got me thinking about maybe how we might organize that even in a clearer way in the report. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Ida. And maybe my next question is for Mix. And you mentioned the number of startup in Latvia that could maybe draw from in the development cooperation. What would you suggest in terms of ways in which the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, or the way that the development cooperation has been working, could be involving those actors more, and what kind of adjustments would be needed for that kind of collaboration or involvement?
Thanks very much. I think that since Latvia is prioritizing digitalization more and more within the programming and plans to spend almost 30% of its bilateral aid on digitalization projects, I think it is vital to sort of view this startup environment in Latvia as an integral part of development policy itself. Here, there's a number of various types of associations that work in this field, and that I think bringing them into the consultation council for various types of development cooperation projects could be a really good step towards it. And we already see, for instance, such initiatives as Riga Tech girls that are working with with women's education and digitalization spaces via, I think it was UNICEF. So I think there are already initiatives that happen at this stage, and bringing in those various types of associations within the consultation process, I think to a greater extent is necessary. There's a number of them, the Riga Tech Hub and many others that exist there, but also sort of it seems that there is a need to really also pay more attention to the startup environment as when we think about generally development policy itself, that all of the issues that the startup environment is facing within Latvia would also have a broader effect on Latvia's capabilities of deploying efficient development programs in the future.
Thanks very much. Next, do I see someone from the audience wants to raise a question? If not, I have a question actually for you, Kadi. And I know you've adopted the Africa strategy for Estonia in development cooperation, and I was wondering if you could kind of walk us through how that digital components kind of played out in the whole thinking about the strategy, in the whole drafting of the strategy, around the priorities, around the ambitions of that strategy. I think it's to be quite interesting for us at the a regional perspective on that. Maybe for you, Ida, and apologies if you mentioned that point when my connection wasn't stable, but it would be also interesting to also hear from you if the how much basically COVID-19 has provided for development cooperation delivery a kind of leap forward, and in what ways? And this is an ambitious question. I know that we only have 3 minutes left, but maybe to point, I think there are really interesting elements that you need maybe for participants can be interesting to bring on.
Thank you. Although Kadi is back,
yes. Do you hear me now?
Yes.
Yes.
I'm sorry. You see, technology is not always friend, But yeah, thank you, Sydney, so much for this question. Indeed, in February, we launched our first ever comprehensive Africa strategy. This means that it's not only about development cooperation. It touches base on foreign security policy, economic development, development cooperation, up to diaspora. So, and I was honored to lead that complicated process, and also very challenging. It took us 1 year to compile the strategy, but indeed, the main reason for having the strategy was that due to the huge interest from the African continent towards our e-governance and digital transformation experience, we had to define our, let's say, priority regions or countries, because Estonia has limited capacity to work with everyone, and we just had to set the focus. Therefore, we took over 20 African countries. The baseline was that, let's say, countries who have showed interest towards us, with whom we've had already several discussions on digital transformation. So there were 20 plus countries, and we used over 40 criteria. Big part of those criteria really touched upon the digital transformation. We tried to kind of have or map out the best match between the Estonian possible comparative advantage related to digital transformation and also the, let's say, the readiness or maturity of a partner country. And the outcome of that assessment showed us that the East Africa region would be the one to focus on. And let's say, hub there is definitely Kenya, where already a lot of innovation is happening, where already a kind of digital maturity is present, and where Estonia can come in with our comparative advantage. We saw very clearly that in conflict-prone countries, there are different needs. And there, first and foremost, let's say the big donors need to step in to make sure that the digital infrastructure is put in place, and only then the other kind of knowledge sharing part can come in. And therefore, like I said, we focus very much on Kenya, where we see also a lot of interest towards us. The second priority region is more south. It's Namibia and Botswana. We know that these countries are actually not LDCs again. They're on a higher level of development. So it's also a little bit already, let's say, exiting the development cooperation and a bit linked to business diplomacy, I'm very honest. And the third, let's say, region is the West, but it's clearly due to the security policy reasons, because in Mali, we, together with our other allies, we tried to, bring peace. And in Mali, we can't do much with regard to digital transformation because the basic needs need to be met, and there we provide humanitarian assistance via the UN agencies. So again, this Africa strategy very much helps us also on working or being member of the D4D hub. We have a very clear focus on certain countries, and I think that makes the kind of life easier for everyone. Over to you, Sydney.
Thank you so much, Kadi, and really also interesting on this process of discussions and analysis on where there is the comparative advantage and at what level it can be brought. Ida, did you want to briefly comment the previous question? No, okay. And we're running out of time, so we'll. I have a question actually. Jin, please. Go ahead, you just need to unmute, and then we'll conclude this session. Logins?
Good afternoon, dear participants. I'm going to speak Latvian. I wanted to share a bit of experience related to development cooperation department in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. I represent the private sector and our experience in Uzbekistan and Central Asia, as yesterday was mentioned, as the seminar was opened, we are going to have the August company. We're transferring data to Uzbekistan. We started the cooperation 3 years ago, and we have been successfully gained some cooperation partners in Uzbekistan. But if we didn't have any Uzbek partners, then nothing would have happened. So the cooperation programs are not really of any use if we don't have good partners on the other side. Our example, or our project was so good that the Uzbek side actually transferred our data, and now there is an Uzbek decision of the Uzbek government to fully take over all our systems. So we know that with small means, we can get good results. And here I have to thank our Ministry of Foreign Affairs and also the Development Cooperation Program. This is what I wanted to say. Thanks to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs.
Thank you so much for this comment. It also brings some concrete dimension to the program, the digitalization and its potential also in the case of Latvia. We have to conclude, unfortunately, because we're moving to another session. But I would like again to thank you, Ida, for taking the time. I know that it was a tough one today, so thanks so much for your participation. Thanks also, Kadi, and for your participation, and Nick's also. It's been really an interesting session, and I'm sure that we can have another one next year to see where we've progressed, because it's as its nature a fast moving target. So thank you so much.